Well, good morning. I'm Jude Kelly. I'm the Artistic Director of the Southbank Centre. We created Women of the World 4 years ago, and so it's delightful. I know that I recognise that some of you have been here before to WOW. Hands up, who's been here before? My God. It's a new cult. And who's not been here before for WOW? Oh, okay. Looks like the same people putting their hands up twice. Early dementia. The thing is that when we started Women of the World, we recognised the fact that there was an enormous zest, energy and determination building from girls and women who suddenly looked around the world, having been told we were post-feminist, having told that the world had sort of sorted itself out. I'm talking about in this country now. And suddenly thinking that actually it was sort of taboo to recognise the fact that inequality still existed in your own life. It was very easy to look outside of your own society and go, look at all the problems in those other places. But actually we were coy and complicit in implying that actually we'd sort of more or less got there with regard to gender equality in the supposed Western world. And yet I was having so many young women coming to me and saying, and you'll recognise this, those who heard me say before, they had this gesture, I'm not a feminist, but, and this sort of opening up of the hands was the imploring moment to say, tell me how I solve some of the issues that I can't solve by myself, but I feel as if I'm, too isolated from other women around these sort of issues. And I just felt as an older woman who'd been through feminism and had the great privilege of hearing from women older than me about why society takes a long time to change and what structures are in place to make you feel that really you're a bit of a loudmouth if you try to change things. I had that memory and that set of processes where I'd had many conversations about the idea that you are somebody who represents change if you want to be a person who can make change happen. But you've got to find the courage and you've got to find the solidarity. And I realised that too many girls and women were isolated from those conversations, and so we decided to start the conversation at WOW. The purpose of WOW is to bring together many, many voices of all different kinds. In fact, the more voices, from the more stories, from the more backgrounds, from the more life experiences, the richer the whole thing is. Because this is not about one group's experience, however dominant that group may sometimes be in the media. This is about the collective experiences of girls and women and boys and men in, I suppose, what you inevitably have to say is a patriarchal society where the structures are such that they're inherited, and therefore finding your way, swimming your way out of that into a different world that we've never experienced before, it's quite an intellectual and emotional and personal struggle. So we're going to be talking about some of those struggles this morning on a stage filled with women who are expert in being women, obviously, but also powerful in their own rights, and represent many women's interests, and for all of us, I think, are now role models. Now, on my left over there, we have we have our signers, Deborah, Natasha, and Debbie. Yes, Dion, exactly. Now, I did tell you to call your name out, didn't I? Because I did say I would do that and forget. Yes, exactly. So, could you just say your name again? Natasha. And Dion. Right. Okay. And over here we have speech text from. So even you don't know each other's names. Claire and Orla. Could I have some more lights up on the panel, do you think? So the first thing that I should do is introduce who you're going to be hearing from, and then there's time for you to ask questions and pose thoughts as well. On my immediate left, we have Jane Garvey, who is one of the great broadcasters. Woman's Hour is her place of choice for broadcasting. She was also the first voice on BBC 5 Live when it launched in 1994, and she's co-presented that network's breakfast and drive time shows. And since 2007, she's been really one of the key voices speaking out about all the interests that women and men have as part of Woman's Hour. Like me, she's a Liverpudlian, and like me, she went to the University of Birmingham. So that we have in common, amongst other things. That's why you're here, yeah. Then we have Kira Cochrane. Kira is the staff features writer for The Guardian, and in December 13, she published an e-book in The Guardian short series, All the Rebel Women, The Rise of the Fourth Wave of Feminism, and that produced a massive response, which I think she's going to talk about too. She was the women's editor of the paper from 2006 to 2010, and she was also co-editor of Cupcakes and Kalishnikovs, 2005, which is a collection of the best of women's journalism, and she's published 2 novels, Escape Routes for Beginners and The Naked Season. Then next to her, bar one space, is Sarah Brown. Sarah Brown, well known to all of us. She's now the founding chair of the Global Business Coalition for Education, and she's the co-founder of a World at School initiative, which mobilizes and supports efforts to achieve education and learning for every child by 2015. She's president of the international children's charity Their World, co-founder of the Maternity Mortality Campaign, and global patron for the White Ribbon Alliance for Safe Motherhood. She's received the Vision and Impact Award for the Global Business Coalition for Health and a Recognition Award for the International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics. She has a background in PR and communication, and obviously she has an intense and long background in noticing how politics works. She's a patron of many things, but the most important thing I think to recognise is that she has used her power and the celebrity status that she has for giving other people voices, which we'll talk about later. She happens to be married to Gordon Brown and has 2 sons. When I say happens to be married, because in her own right, she has become so much more than a First Lady, and I think that's important to notice. Then we have Shirley Williams, Baroness Williams of Crosby. Shirley is probably the person amongst us who has the longest view on how feminism has worked its way through UK and the world. She was first elected MP in Crosby in 1981 for the Social Democrats at that stage, and before that had an incredible and illustrious history in the Labour Party. She started work as a journalist. Of course, she's a Professor Emeritus of Elective Politics at Harvard, author of many books, recipients of hundreds of awards, frequent broadcaster still, and is now in the one of the few women represented in the Parliamentary Art Collection. And her portrait by the artist Victoria Russell was unveiled in 2007. We can be assured, I think, that she won't be forgotten in history, one of the key problems for women activists. And then, I say finally, but we might need to introduce your daughter as well. Dr. Maggie Aderin-Pocock worked as a space scientist for the last 10 years. She's managed a range of multidisciplinary teams making scientific instruments, from handheld mine detectors to the James Webb Space Telescope. She has a fellowship at the UCL, and she's just recently been given the role of the TV presenter for The Sky at Night. She's an extraordinary communicator, science communicator, coming from a very unusual background, I would say, having gone into the stratosphere from a very small flat, looking out at the stars, and I'm sure she'll tell you more about that. So I'd like to thank you all for turning up early in the morning. I'd like to thank this group for turning up early in the morning. And I'm going to pass over to Kira, who's going to take us through, I think, the recent history of why we're now calling it the fourth wave of feminism. Thank you. Kira.
Thanks so much for coming today, and thanks for asking me to talk, Jude. It looks like it's going to be an incredibly exciting Women of the World Festival this year, at a time when feminist argument, activism and debate is really booming. I mean, everything's going so fast at the moment. The campaigns are setting up and sort of triumphing so quickly that they can sometimes seem to sort of zoom past before you can even catch them. You only have to look at this week. It started with an enormous outcry by feminists about ads put out by the bookie Paddy Power, which made light of the killing of Reva Steenkamp and asked people to bet on the outcome of Oscar Pistorius' trial. The ads read, "It's Oscar time, money back if he walks," and showed Pistorius' head superimposed on an Oscar statuette. Feminists understandably felt that there was something really quite repugnant about seeking profit from the death of a woman who was shot 4 times through a bathroom door. A petition set up by a feminist called Jean Hatchett on change.org asked for the betting to be stopped, and in the space of 48 hours, it had received more than 122,000 signatures. The Advertising Standards Authority also received 5,200 complaints about that advertisement, the most complaints for an ad campaign ever. This led to the ads being immediately withdrawn. It was a small but significant victory against a culture that trivialises domestic violence and misogyny, and therefore provides an environment in which it thrives. Last week saw the start of another campaign, this time by activist and writer Owen Jones, who set up a petition against the sexualisation of girls by the Daily Mail. He highlighted the paper's description of one 8-year-old girl, Heidi Klum's daughter, as a leggy beauty, for instance. The petition attracted around 30,000 signatures in 24 hours. And almost exactly a month ago, a campaign backed by The Guardian was started by 17-year-old Bristol schoolgirl Farmer Mohammed. It called for schools to start discussing the risks of female genital mutilation with pupils and became one of the fastest growing petitions on change.org ever, at one point attracting 2 signatures per second. Speaking to Bree Rogers-Lowry recently, the UK director for change.org, she told me that of all the campaigns set up on the site, and it has campaigns across every subject imaginable, those that address women's rights are now the most likely to be successful. That was the case for the FGM petition, which overall has attracted almost 250,000 signatures, as well as the support of Ban Ki-moon and Malala Yousafzai. It also, most importantly, convinced Education Secretary Michael Gove to write to all primary and secondary head teachers in England about female genital mutilation. Those are the events of just 1 month, and I haven't even mentioned the campaign set up by Meltem Avsil, a 20-year-old student and former asylum seeker who was locked up in immigration detention when she was just 13 and is now running a high-profile campaign to close the facility Yarlswood, where women over the years have been on hunger strike and made allegations of sexual abuse by staff. I haven't talked about the peaceful process that Meltem and her supporters staged outside the Home Office on February the 13th, in which a woman who is currently locked in Yarlswood spoke to the crowd over the phone and moved them to silence. I haven't talked about the events that took place all over the country, actually all over the world a day later, on February the 14th for 1 Billion Rising, or the events due to take place tomorrow on International Women's Day, which include the Million Women Rise March through central London, which is thought to be the biggest women's march in Europe against male violence. All of this has happened in the few months since I published All the Rebel Women, which was in December last year. When the book came out, I wrote a long piece in The Guardian, which Jude read, where I work as a features writer at The Guardian, and I charted some of the campaigning triumphs of modern British feminism. And some of the comments on the piece were along the lines of other comments I've had before, which were, there goes Kira Cochrane again, banging on about feminism. And it kind of made me laugh. It's true that in the 15 years since I started as a journalist, I have written about feminism a lot, and there have always been brilliant women out there who have been campaigning and shouting about misogyny and justice. But the difference is that in the past, they've often been lone voices. I admire those women really enormously for speaking out about feminism during times when it's been really stigmatised, when feminism has been the F word in a very negative way, always the trigger for a major backlash. It's also true, and this might have been what those commenters were referring to, that about 3 years ago I wrote a piece for The Guardian about a stream of feminist publishing in the UK. There had been years in which there seemed to be very few, if any, British feminist books, and suddenly there was Natasha Walter's Living Dolls, Kat Banyard's The Equality Illusion, Catherine Redfern and Christine Own's Reclaim the F Word, and Caitlin Moran's How to Be a Woman. That was a sign that a new wave of feminist activism was about to hit, and about a year ago it did. In September 2012, I remember reading a piece by a writer called Caroline Criado Perez on the Huffington Post website about a new campaign against Page 3. I went to one of my editors at work and said I thought it would be worth doing a short interview with Lucy Ann Holmes, the writer and actor who had started the campaign. The editor asked me a question, which was fair enough. He said, there have been loads of campaigns against Page 3. Why is this one any different? Why is this one going to succeed? It was a fair question, as I say, but the atmosphere did feel different. It felt much more promising to me. One reason was that the Leveson inquiry was ongoing, and the country was therefore already involved in a serious debate about press ethics. The other was the growth of the feminist movement, especially online, where the campaign started with a petition. That petition now has more than 151,000 signatures. And actually, when I wrote this speech, it was, which was a day ago, it was 142,000, and I double-checked this morning, and it was 151,000. So something is happening in the No More Page 3 campaign at the moment. And that sort of highlights the popularity of the feminist movement at the moment, as does the fact that 25,000 experiences of sexism were sent into the website Everyday Sexism within the space of a year, and those accounts now top 50,000. When that site was set up by the activist Laura Bates in April 2012, she thought a handful of women might post stories of sexual assault, street harassment, workplace harassment, that she might just about get enough responses, maybe, to write a short series of articles about sexism. The size of the site has, in fact, grown exponentially. It quickly turned into a movement, and there are now sites in 17 different countries, as well as one where refugee women can recount their experiences. And because of the size of it, it's used in really interesting ways. So, for instance, last year, the thousands upon thousands of reports of sexual assault and harassment on public transport were put to use training London police about the issue. And the breadth of the site is such that after a year, when Bates was asked on Twitter whether anyone had ever sent in a story of being sexually assaulted on a tram, she searched the database and found 25 examples. Caroline Criado de Perez didn't just write about feminist campaigns. She started the Women's Room in 2012 with Catherine Smith, a database of women with all kinds of expertise who were more than happy to speak on telly and radio. That was an attempt to improve women's representation in public life, which began after the Today programme featured 2 all-male discussions in the space of 2 days, one on teenage pregnancy, the other on breast cancer, which forced John Humphreys into the slightly surreal position of asking a guest to imagine how he would feel about screening if he was actually a woman. In 2013, Criado Perez also set up a campaign to keep a woman of achievement on British banknotes, succeeding quickly. And when this success led to an enormous barrage of abuse and rape threats on social media, as feminist successes quite often do, she campaigned on that issue too. What you see up and down the UK at the moment is women getting angry and getting involved. In August 2013, when the group UK Feminista held a national day of action for their Lose the Lads Mags campaign, there were 19 protests around the country. There are now around 150 local grassroots groups listed on UK Feminista's website, and the feminist movement is so popular that Girl Guiding UK introduced an activism badge last year, which is very different to how I remember the Girl Guides as a kid, but brilliant. And not long after that, a survey of Mumsnet users found 59% consider themselves feminists, which is double the proportion of those who don't. Those numbers provide a great opportunity to get things done, and over the last few years, feminists have been campaigning with incredible energy, taking to the streets dressed as suffragettes and historic feminist heroes to fight for their rights. There are a lot of women in this country at the moment who have Emily Wilding-Davison costumes in their closet. There have been feminist campaigns against austerity and the cuts, with the Fawcett Society pointing out the way that public sector job losses, for example, and cuts to benefits and services disproportionately affect women. The group Go Feminist has set up a campaign to try to combat cuts to services for women who have been raped, sexually assaulted, have experienced domestic violence, forced marriage, or FGM. And last year, Southall Black Sisters protested outside the offices of the UK Border Agency against racist immigration laws and propaganda, including the notorious Go Home vans. They also marched in solidarity with protesters in Delhi, who began a wave of demonstrations following the death of a woman who was gang raped in the city in December 2012, protests against rape culture that soon spread to Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Aikamara Larasai was one of the activists who began a campaign in the UK to address racist and sexist stereotypes in music videos, and a slew of student unions across the UK have opened up debate about misogyny in music by banning the song Blurred Lines from being played in union spaces. There have also been boycotts of Page 3 by many student unions. Karen Ngala-Smith, chief executive of the charity NIA, started counting the toll of misogynist murders in early 2012, a year that started with 7 women being killed by men in the space of just 3 days. Her Counting Dead Women project puts names and stories to the statistics we so often hear and asks the government to take a much stronger approach to understanding and addressing violence against women. What's happening in feminism at the moment feels really pragmatic and active, more so than academic, but it is underpinned by a large and growing interest in intersectionality, in trying to understand hierarchies of discrimination, how women are discriminated against not just as a result of their sex, but their race, gender, sexuality, class, ability, and other categories. Women in the group Black Feminists, including Rennie Edo-Lodge and Lola Okolozi, have been doing brilliant intellectual work on this subject, and there are strong voices too writing about disability in women, including Frances Ryan. In the UK, Paris Lees has been advocating for the rights of trans people and trans women, as has Janet Mock in the US. What we're seeing right now is the growth of new force, with women responding with great energy and passion to issues as and when they arise, and often triumphing quickly. In this, they reflect a broader activist environment at the moment, where people are having to work hard and fast to counter the issues that crop up constantly as a result of austerity measures. Issues of homelessness and food poverty, unemployment and underemployment, workfare, the bedroom tax, fitness for work assessments. The feminist movement today feels part of something bigger, a growing movement for social change, which aims to fight inequality and discrimination wherever it is found. There are young women in the feminist movement who are growing up with an incredibly sophisticated understanding of inequality and are determined to address it. Women like Lily Evans, who's 16, who started the Twitter Youth Feminist Army in her early teens and set up a campaign for consent education in schools. Or Yasna Kati, who is 17 and has been campaigning for better sex education and for the end of page 3. Women like Farmer Mohammed with her excellent campaign against FGM, and Meltem Avsil with her fight to close down Yarl's Wood detention centre, where she was sent when she was just 13. These are exciting times, and the scope of feminist possibility in the UK seems enormous. I'm hoping that the movement grows even larger, even stronger, that it builds on the work of all the women that have come before us, on the radicalism and extraordinary bravery of the suffrage campaigners, the sheer overwhelming ambition of the 1970s second wavers, and the idealism and punk attitude of the third wave riot girls and thinkers. This is a moment to change the world, to win the feminist argument for good. Thank you.
Okay, so when I read Kira's article, I thought, actually, it's wonderful to have this moment marked in the sand where you can chart the fact that progress really is happening, and that it is not embarrassing to say, these are the things I believe and these are the things I want to change, and that people can collect around all of these different kinds of causes whilst at the same time feeling they're joined together. I still would like to endow on you the right to prevaricate if you feel the word feminist can't belong to you. I just want to give you that right, because the reason we called WOW Women of the World was because we wanted to include all women while they debated the issue of the word itself. And I say that because it is a much fought over word, less so now. I mean, 59% of Mumsnet, good statistic, but you know there are still women who I think have anxiety. That's what I want to say about the word, and certainly men who have anxiety about it too. But let's put that to one side for a second, because you know you've got that permission. And I won't ask you either how many Emily Wilding Davis costume holders we have here to come out of the closet. But I would just like to ask you one thing, Kira, before I turn to Shirley, which is this. The excitement about this movement, that we've seen waves before. Yeah. That there was an extraordinary group of women in the theatre in the 1600s who ran most of the playhouses, and they were called the female wits. Anybody remember them? I don't think you do, because you know you won't remember that it happened. And so there've been parts of history before, and you've probably researched this. So we're optimistic, and that's what I wanted to start with. Things are changing. What anxiety have you got? Obviously not the word feminism, but the ability for it to have longevity. Does that strike you, looking back at previous waves?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really There is a concern always. I was reading Susan Faluda's Backlash again when I was writing the book, and she says that the feminist movement is a sort of history of fits and starts. And I was also speaking to a feminist academic called Finn Mackay, who was saying that what often happens is that you have a sort of fall off in feminism after a triumph, because everyone's worked so hard for that triumph. So you have something like the vote for women, and you have a fall off in the feminist movement after that, partly obviously to do with social conditions and the war, but also to do with that triumph, and everyone is spent. So I think that is always a concern, and I think there probably always will be some element of waves and a falling away. But at the moment, it feels like a more popular movement than it ever has. And it feels like people are getting involved, not necessarily devoting their lives to feminism, but there are so many opportunities to get involved in quite a low-level way where you can still make change. You can write in to the Everyday Sexism Project in 5 minutes with a story about what's happened to you, and that becomes part of a very, very mass movement. So I do think, in that sense, I feel more optimistic than I ever have, because it feels so big.
And men, boys and men's involvement in feminism. We started a festival called Being a Man, about 6 weeks ago, and it was incredibly successful, powerful, interesting, and we'll talk about that later maybe. But, you know, when you mentioned that thing about 2 men discuss breast cancer, on one level you could say, well, great, at last, you know, to invite men to come in and to imagine what it would be like to have breast cancer. That's not such a bad thing to ask men to do, is it? So where do you, I mean, you know, there's 2 ways of looking at it, but involving men in feminism, do you see optimism there?
Yeah, definitely. And that conversation, it was 3 men. That was a problem, because it was a presenter and 2 men. So it was, I think that added to it. I think, but yeah, I was speaking to someone actually who was telling me that at one of the student unions in London, I think, the Feminist Society is majority men, which was very interesting to me. So I think there is a lot more interest, and I think there is a lot more interest in sort of talking about ideas around masculinity, which is obviously what you tapped into with Being a Man, and in exploring, for instance, the stigmatization that men sometimes feel if they give up even 2 weeks for paternity leave. They sometimes feel stigmatization in the workplace, and things like that actually work against women's rights as well as against men's rights. So I think there's interest in looking at that and seeing how we can find a kind of better balance, because actually I don't think gender stereotypes do men many favours either.
Right. So, well, we'll come back to that, and I'd like to come back to this word intersectionality as well, because another thing I wanted to stress is that there is inevitably, and quite rightly, pedagogical and academic history to any social movement. But that sometimes also means that there are words which kind of land at your feet and you don't know, well, is that a word I need to use or include? What does it mean? And I'd be very keen that this 4th wave of feminism doesn't trap itself into language which inevitably starts excluding people. And maybe that's something we could discuss later. But Shirley, can I come to you? Because you've seen a number of waves of feminism, and your mother, Vera Brittain, was key to feminism in its early stages. Where do you feel feminism has now got up to? When you look back at history, can you give us a kind of a snapshot of these different waves from your point of view?
Well, first, let me thanks very much for a very ebullient and exciting introduction. It was very good indeed, and very upbeat. 3 points which are less upbeat I want to make. The first is, going back to what you said, Jude, about the tide going in and out. Let me give you the most dramatic example, which almost nobody remembers, about when the tide went out. In 1788, a group of French women went to the assembly, which was established after the French Revolution, and put before it a declaration on the rights of women. The assembly laughed its head off. They were all men. They rejected it as ridiculous, and nothing came out of it at all. There was a revolution. It was a revolution at the end for men. And that can happen very easily. 2 things that worry me. One is, in the most recent PISA report, that's the report on the standards of education, both in school and in university, it's very striking that the PISA report shows that girls consistently outperform boys in reading, consistently under perform in science and mathematics. The PISA report says, and I think it's probably absolutely right, that one of the main reasons for this is that girls are convinced they don't understand and can't understand mathematics and science. You did. But there's a very widespread view still there, even now, that women just aren't up to the hard subjects. Second point about PISA, and it's worth mentioning too, is that they attribute this to a lack of self-confidence in women. I think whether other people in the audience do, I see it all the time. When I do public meetings, the ratio of people who get up to ask questions is roughly 4 men to every 1 woman. That's exactly the same when I do school assemblies. There's a head boy, and in the more enlightened schools, they have a head boy and a head girl. But if there's a clash between them, it's the head boy that almost always wins out. So I think the second point I want to make is that I think confidence among girls is still very slight. I'll say what I attribute it to. I attribute it to a great extent to the failure to recognize the importance of fathers to daughters. Fathers are always seen as being crucial in the development of boys. They're often not seen at all in respect to the development of girls. Yet the evidence cries out to you that where a father has real commitment to the belief that his daughter can achieve her full talents, that girl will go out to achieve remarkable things. In my area of politics, time and again when you see women get to the top, Michelle Bachelet in, for example, Chile, Dr. Sirleaf in Liberia, case after case, and of course we can even look at Margaret Thatcher as a good example. It's where the father commits himself to believe in his daughter as well as his son. That makes almost all the difference. Number 3, they've only got 4, you'll be glad to know. Number 3, I guess it goes back to my mother in a way. What I would say is that pursuing power without pursuing the concept that power for change is one thing and power to stay in the same place is another. What I'm frightened about a bit is there's a tendency for the feminist movement, and I think it's a mistake, to look at power as being the man-shaped thing we have, which then is picked up by women. That's useless. That won't get us anywhere. It's got to be the power to make really changes in society where women and men are seen as both having to contribute to the good of society. Final point, and it's something which to me has been extremely significant. If you look at how Nelson Mandela handled the move from apartheid to democracy in South Africa, one of the brilliant things he did was to set up committees at every single level, from the neighbourhood through to the national government. Those committees all had to have 1/3 women members. But the key and brilliant thing was that if the women didn't show up, the committee had no power. And what that meant was that men were recruited to make sure that women attended the meetings and were heard. And it's getting that mobilization of people of goodwill on both male and female that begins to make feminism add up, as my mother would want it to a society which is more consensual, which is more willing to listen, which is more open to the objectives, things like peace. And I just leave you with that thought. I think that's what it really matters. It's feminism about something, including about men. It's not feminism simply seeking power of a man-shaped kind.
Thank you. Can I just ask one more question? Because I wouldn't mind a bit more light on the audience, a bit jollier. It's a little bit dark, just generally. So if you just lights up generally, just full light. You said yesterday that there was incidents of violence in the playground from boys to girls, boys resenting girls achieving. Yeah. And this really ties back to the idea of older men modelling support for their girls and fathering their boys in a different manner. Yes, so I just wondered whether you just mentioned that again about the thing you said was alarming about the playground now.
Well, there's some evidence from Kids Club, for one, and some of the others, that very small boys, we're talking about 6s and 7s, are in some cases beginning to assault girls of the same age. I mean, obviously not sexually, except insofar as it's symbolic. You know, talking about you got no willy and so forth, that's effectively symbolic. But what is happening is a kind of reflection of the violence that we've seen in domestic violence. In other words, a belief that men show, or boys, if you like, show their masculinity through violence. And I think we have to tackle that head on. It's a very, very difficult and worrying development.
Yeah, because I think that one of the things that's been happening recently, and these are for other sessions in WOW during this whole weekend, is that when you see the rise in rape, and you see the rise in domestic violence, and you see the rise in violence in war, people have said, well, that might be just because people are more prepared to come forward. And of course, people are more prepared to come forward. But I think there might be something else as well, which is a retaliation against loss of power.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right.
And that unless this power discussion is shared between boys and girls, which is why today, at the same time, in parallel to this, we're having how do you have a gender-equal curriculum going on in another place.
I think we're absolutely right. I'd only add one thing to that. Years ago, I was, believe it or not, the Minister for Pornography at the Home Office. Well, I had three. I had prisons, pornography, and probation. And the civil service made sure I looked at the pornography stuff by putting sticky tape on it. And if the sticky tape wasn't turned off, I'd get it back in my next red box to do all over again. What struck me extraordinarily forcefully was that almost all the most powerful pornographic material always mixed sex and violence. It was never sex on its own. It was sex mixed with violence. The endless pictures of women being whipped and beaten and chained and so forth. Men know. And it stuck in my head that was much the most powerful impact compared to, for example, pictures of people snooking together something under a tree. That was not really interesting. But chained, beaten, and all the rest of it, very interesting.
And I don't know when that was, but a few years ago probably. When was that?
Yes.
Well, really what I was going to make the point was that in a discussion we had last year, Martin Daubeny, who's the ex-editor of Loaded, who now is looking into the addictive nature of porn, really, he's able to claim that the imagery that children are accessing and young men and women are accessing is far and away more extreme than anything that your sticky tape would have been covering at the time. So I think that's also a frightening thing. But Maggie, let's stay with optimism for a minute, because you just the fact that you are now the sky at night, as it were.
That's a wide domain.
That you are the sky. The fact that you are a young woman and that you are African British, those two things in itself are an extraordinary cause for celebration. But I wondered whether you feel that feminism has achieved that platform for you to be able to sort of stand on it, and how you experienced power when you were little, how you claimed this power space.
Because I've got a sort of a list here of sort of talking about power, and the first one was sort of power with tech. I'll get on to me later.
Can you all hear?
Oh, sort of a bit closer.
A bit nearer, yeah.
Okay. Okay, how about that? Oh, yes, I can hear that. Okay, so there is a great power in technology today, and it's a power that affects women's lives in many, many different ways. And it's sort of simple ways. It's things like the refrigerator, but people don't have to run around getting food every day. It's sort of contraception has transformed women's lives. It's piped water. Many women spend long hours every day getting water, and we can change their lives with a simple bit of engineering. So technology is there, and it's part of our lives, and it's making a big effect on women. And it's just like Kira, the sort of the activities you were talking about, social media, it's all part of the technology, and it's giving people who didn't have a voice in the past a voice, an opinion. They can share their opinions. So technology is part of our lives. And there's the power of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. The numbers are still not good. If you look at STEM in general, it's looking pretty good now, because you've got over 50% of women going into medicine, in biology, sort of again about 50%. But when you start looking at sort of what would be called the sort of physics, chemistry, subjects like that, we're getting down to 20% women. And by the time you get to engineering, you're 9%. So sometimes when we talk about STEM in general, it looks really good. But when you dig down to the numbers, we've still got a deficit. So why are these deficits happening? Well, in the past, I think there was definitely external barriers. Women don't do engineering and things like that. But now I think it is many internal barriers. Women, as you said, women just don't, I go out to schools and I say, so would you consider sort of doing a degree in physics? No, girls don't do that. I think, but why not? And we have some fantastic role models out there. There's Jocelyn Bell Brunel, sort of a fantastic physicist, discovered pulsars. Didn't get the Nobel Prize, but that's another story. But discovered pulsars. A fantastic living role model. And if you look in the past, Marie Curie, about 4 people have won 2 Nobel Prizes. Marie Curie won a Nobel Prize in physics and a Nobel Prize in chemistry. But when you go out to schools, you don't see these role models. You see pictures of pale male and stale men, very crusty, on the walls. You don't see any of these women. And so we need to share these role models. We need to get them out there. And it's just sort of research recently by the Institute of Physics showed that girls in all-girls schools, and I went to all-girls schools, are much likely to take these subjects, to take sort of the chemistry and the physics, because they don't feel the pressure, the peer pressure from the boys. And just sort of with my daughter, who's just about awake now, I was speaking to her, and she goes to nursery about twice a week, but I'm slightly suspicious of nursery, and so she travels around with me a lot. But the other day we were sort of playing with 2 dolls. And she said, oh yes, the boy doll is the doctor and the girl doll's the nurse. I had a gasp. I did the same. I was like, where did that come from? Because I feel I've been sort of trying to I'm a doctor, daddy's a doctor, And so where did that come from? And so we live in a society which is dictating these things. Girls have internal barriers, but we are surrounded. There was a campaign recently, I think, against Marks and Spencer's, because they had boys' toys. And the boys' toys are the really good toys, the fun toys, but they label them boys' toys. And so if we live in a society that is perpetuating this, Lois sort of just coming up to 4. She is taking this in subliminally from the cartoon she's watching. It's just in society. So until we change that, I think we're not going to get very far. And so I think we need to step forward, and we need more role models. Okay, now we've got a bit here called Maggie and Power, because I don't want to say powerful Maggie, but Maggie and Power, because I think power is quite interesting. And I think I'm probably sitting here today because I'm a loudmouth.
No. Because you're powerful.
But no, see, power, when you say you're powerful, I think, whoa. What does that mean? Because when I looked up power before I came on here, and power is sort of having influence over people. And influence, I think, is great. I've seen 120,000 school kids in the last 6 years just telling them about science, the wonder of science, the power of science, and how they can become scientists, or just have an awareness of science. But when you say power, I associate power with someone like Putin, sort of going in, guns blazing, and that's not something I want to have. I want to influence people and put an argument to people, but power sounds more assertive. Power sounds a bit, banging the fist. So the actual word power scares me. But at the same time, one of the things I've been doing is going out and we're trying to train more women because it's a scenario with the Today programme. Because there was that conversation, and I think they did some research, and they realised that over a period of 2 weeks, they had sort of about 2 female experts on. And I must admit, since then, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. She's black, she's female, get her on! And so there's that aspect. And so we've started trying to train more female experts. And the thing is, one of the things that comes across every time we sort of train these experts is, I want to get out there, but I usually send them to my boss, who just happens to be male. Or I want to get out there, but I just don't have the confidence. What if I get something wrong? And why I say I'm a loudmouth is because sometimes I think we have to just stand up and put our head above the parapet. And sometimes it will get shot off, and sometimes we'll fall flat on our faces. But as women, we need to get up and do it. And to me, it's the remote control effect. Because years ago, probably 15 years ago, my husband and I were sitting at home, and we were trying to do something with a TV, and it was quite simple in those days, but I couldn't get the remote control to work. So I said, oh, it's not working. And he said, don't worry, I'll do it. And he picked it up, and then he was just pressing buttons randomly, like me. And I was saying, but hold it, I can do that. And I think that's what we realise. Sometimes men, I think just from their characters, they're more assertive. They step up and they say, yes, I can do that. They don't have any more knowledge than us. It's the remote control effect. We can do it too. But so it took me a long time to realise that, but it's true. And so that's why everybody in this audience, everybody in this audience, men and women, everybody, we need to be role models. We all have something wonderful to share, and we need to get out and share it. It's about, I don't like the idea of power, but it's about influence. It's about giving people choices. It's about talking to people and sharing our bright ideas. And so, yeah, finally, women in power. Yes, yeah, do we want power or influence? I'm not sure. In terms of feminism, to me, feminism is about equality. It's not about power. It's just about getting the balance right. And so I think we may be getting closer, but I think we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, a comment I would make on imagery. Yes, you know, you're black and you're female and you're great and so on, but the fact that you've got your daughter with you, I mean, there can't be, you know, there must be many people here who go, oh, what a relief to see a child, you know, on a stage with her parent, because, you know, and one of the best videos we've got from WOW 12, I think, is you with your daughter much younger, and she's here, and you're giving a standing up speech, and you're saying they've got Muppets as role models, but no women.
Yes.
And there you are, you know, with your daughter, and I think that the issue of childcare comes up over and over and over again with regard to equality. But what doesn't get talked about enough is the right for society to have children as part of the way that we all live our lives. So at the moment, childcare is also part of that kind of, where can we put them to solve them? And of course, putting them and solving them somewhere should be an issue that men and women solve together. But another alternative, like this redetermination of the word power, would be not putting them everywhere out of the way, but including them in more ways. And that's something which we probably need to use our imagination.
I'm incredibly lucky, because I first started taking Laurie on the stage when she was about 5 months. And it was just sort of convenient. But I didn't realise I was making a statement. It was just very convenient. And but one woman, I gave a talk about science, and a woman came up to me and she was crying. And she said, I've just had a child, and I've just gone back into sort of university to study physics. And seeing you with your baby there made me think it was possible. And I think I'm incredibly lucky, because Laurie's lovely. She's sort of just really mild-mannered, and she sort of sits there and sort of looks at suspiciously audiences. But I'm just a very, very lucky woman, because I don't think all kids would be able to do that.
No, it's not that simple. I'm not saying it's simple, but no, I'm just saying that it's an important symbol, because very often women, when they get into a position of influence and, you know, public status, they feel very compelled to demonstrate that they're playing by all the rules.
Yes.
And you are, you know, you're delightfully maverick. And that is a great help. It's a great help. Okay, so let me turn to Sarah now, because Sarah, you've walked corridors that have actually been keen to just call themselves corridors of power, and that's meant that you've observed the use of power both in a positive way and in a negative way. I'm interested in how you choose to elicit power from people. You know, where are you going to look for giving people power, finding out where people's power can lie, and encourage them to have it?
Well, I think I've been privileged in that I've been on the inside of government looking out, but I haven't been, you know, as Shirley has, sitting at the ministerial top table with that as my brief. So I found myself in that unusual position of having the skill sets that I had and having the experience that I had, but without a particular position or responsibility. It also meant I didn't actually have that real power from day one. I had no budget, I have no remit. But what it seemed to me was that the visibility gives you a certain power, and that you have an opportunity to use your voice. But my starting point is always when you know what you want to say, which has never really been a problem for me, you find out that other people also have things they're passionate about saying. And so I was able to use the vantage point of being in a very visible position to be able to engage with other people and connect their voices together. And I think what I learned, being able to be on the inside looking out, is what is it that makes a difference? You know, Kira's talked so eloquently about lots of different campaigns and making changes, that when you gather together voices on those petitions, you can make those small changes. People will take down an advert, people will, you know, change a ruling, or they'll, you know, take a different path. But the only way I have seen senior political figures work is if you're sitting there at the top table, you have a very short amount of time, quite often, to make a decision on one particular issue. There'll be one meeting that comes up, a set of papers this high, a lot of things to go to, and a moment where you make a decision and move to something else. So if you're the campaigner, you want to find that moment and make sure your voice has been heard. And my other observation was always that if a political leader is sitting there trying to make a decision, and there's a lot of different constituencies presenting subtly differing points of view, it's very difficult to come down on the side of one decision. But if you work together to keep your ask very clear and very loud and very straightforward, then it's very hard for somebody, as they've got their moment to make a decision, to hold all of that at bay. So I think that's what I've always used, is each of us have a voice, and each of us want to use it. We don't always have the confidence to use it, or necessarily understand the means to use it, which is with a separate set of issues. But when we do know how to, collectively, we can make an enormous amount of change. I'm a great believer in that the power of movements to affect change, and how you can work together. And I think you can't sway a movement one way or the other. You really have to carry everybody with you. The other issue, of course, is where you get that confidence from to use your voice, and where you know that you can at all. And I think the huge impact of role models like Maggie and like Shirley, who are there, programs like Women's Hour, who are transmitting those messages all the time, help communicate that if there are women who tread that path first, it makes it so much easier for other people to understand that they can use their voice and follow and join in.
So the idea of joining in also means that you get the Girl Guides badge for activism, presumably.
Yeah.
Are you finding that in other parts of the world where the stark realities of women's discrimination against women make their lives sometimes absolutely almost impossible and bleak? Are you finding that it is easier for women to decide to become activists because the cause that they're fighting for is so clear?
It doesn't matter what part of the world you go for. If women have issues that are presented to them in their daily lives, that's what they're going to be calling for. Those issues might immediately be around very basic rights and very basic forms of survival and economic opportunity, and then building out from there to have greater opportunities for education, for having greater horizons for career ambitions and future prospects. But where women connect together, meet in little groups, where you've got local council, where you have village meetings, you can start to communicate. And of course, what really opens things out for us is the digital world. Where you can have movement of people who can share information through mobile phone technology and receive information back, knowing that you're part of something that's very connected, is very powerful in itself, I think.
So, Maggie said that the word power made her think about Putin. You talk about grassroots power, and you happily use the word power in that context. What's the definition of grassroots power?
To me, a grassroots power is where you've got a joining together of a connected community, whether that's an immediate community where everyone can meet and talk with each other, or whether they're connected over a digital highway. But that is a power when you can effect change. Shirley had another way of talking where she talks about man-shaped power. I think of Miranda Hart, where she identifies words as male words and female words, and she talks about plinth as a male word and moist as a very female word, and it's hilarious. But power feels a very male word, and equality feels a much more female-shaped word.
So we were talking earlier about some of the distressing aspects of power that circulates down corridors, almost like a kind of mist that you can't see, and how sometimes it makes it impossible to achieve things because levers are being pulled against people who are fighting causes. With the rise of the women's movement again, and therefore the backlash of misogyny that seems to be there, do you think that government, that Parliament, that the House of Commons, the House of Lords, do you think that they do they need to do something more root and branch about moving forward in terms of thinking about equality?
Might be a better question for Shirley than me, but I would say the easy answer is, of course, they need to change. Not just in this country, but any country where you've got, an establishment, patterns set in, and it becomes harder to get in and and break things. You know, the passage of the House of Commons just to have mothers be able to go in, and you know, there weren't even enough women's loos not that long ago, never mind the opportunity to take your child in, and the hoo-ha over breastfeeding over the years. And, you know, these things are very slow to change in institutions that have been there for a long time. But I'm a huge believer that you can effect big changes. I'm really involved at the moment with looking at how we get every child into school and learning around the world. It seems a really basic right, and yet there are 57 million children who do not get the chance to have a single day at school. Inevitably, slightly more of them are girls, and more interestingly for girls, their chance of staying in school as long as boys and learning as much as boys is so restricted. But it's a very big number, a very big, scary number. But actually, you break it down and you work out the countries where these children are in school and you put out appeal to governments. It's very difficult for a leader of a country to say, no, I'm not that interested in every child going to school. You know, nothing needs to be invented. We don't even need physicists and chemists for this. It's a very basic, we just need them to learn to be that when they're in the classroom. You know, all of those things, you can do it, but it's about having those big conversations coming in at the top, but a big call for action coming from the bottom. And all of those conversations need to happen, but empowering every single person to play their part in calling for the changes in their community and reaching out far and wide, I think is where a power comes from. I do believe there is a grassroots power is what will change things, is creating those big movements.
And have you found, I mean, you know, you could easily have shied away from public platforms because you're an easy target, you know, because women who put themselves forward in public life are a target anyway. And then because you're married to Gordon, that makes you a double target. But you've chosen to carry on using your influence to give other people power.
I didn't choose it for a very long time. Gordon was Chancellor for 10 years, and I had a really, really good system going where you would hold charity events, hold different campaign events, and you would have somebody else get up and give the speak, and I'd greet everybody and say hello, but I was never the person that stood on a platform or spoke. But just over the years, it built up where when you find you've got things to say, and you find yourself in such a spotlight, and everyone's assuming you're the person that's going to start the conversation. But I have to tell you, the very first public speech I gave, I can see Anne Key in the front row, and I think she was there when I gave it. I got to the end of my speech, and I passed out cold. I was so nervous, I just fainted. So things have improved since then.
But that's an act of courage on your part. You know, the moment when you realise that you're compelled to do something, despite the fact that you think, oh, I can't, and people will think this about me. I mean, this still happens to all of us. I can, you know, I'm backstage going, oh my God, I should never have said this, never have started this festival. Really, nobody will come. And I was saying, it's sold out, yes, but they won't come. Do you still have to push yourself over these hurdles of confidence?
Yes, but these days I remember to breathe when I'm doing it. But yes, absolutely. But I also worry about people who don't find their voice. They have things that they need and want to do and don't get that opportunity. You know, a job promotion that you're after, something you want to go and say to your teacher or your doctor, a campaign for your community, something's happening in your neighbourhood, and if you haven't got that way to unlock and find your voice, it's very difficult to make that change happen. Yeah. Thankfully, you can also do it online with petitions, so you can do it quietly as well if you really don't want to speak out.
I mean, I think it's important for people to realise that you know, people sit on stages like this and they look like, you know, they've sorted stuff out, but every single person, man or boy, girl or woman, they're going to have all bits of frayed around the edges, aren't they? And you go through waves of security and insecurity as well, in relationship to age, in relationship to things that are happening in your life. So, you know, this is kind of back to you, really, to say that, you know, you've got power to be an activist, you've got power to join movements, and you've got power to take platforms about the things that you care about. And in a sense, you can only do it by having a go, and as Maggie said, you know, falling on your face, maybe fainting occasionally, maybe did you fall on your face or your back? But whatever it is, it needs us all to want a different world. So I'm going to turn to Jane now, because Jane, you presided over the list last year that was the power list. And you and I had a really interesting conversation about this, because it was an extraordinary list of women that were voted for as being women who have power. And yet I heard that subsequently the women who were interviewed, only 3 of them said that they thought themselves as powerful.
Yeah.
And I was one of them. And that made me feel self-conscious, but also curious as to this relationship women have with the word power. And so what was your sense of, first of all, choosing the word deliberately, as you did, and then how it worked its way through the year with women?
I think Shirley's right. I think we need to reclaim and reshape the word power and make it female. I think that would be the one thing we could do. The power list was not my idea, I should say, and indeed nothing. The women who appeared on the power list were not selected by me or by Jenny Murray but by the panel of judges who ploughed their way through many suggestions.
Put your microphone a bit nearer.
Sorry, I should know how to use it, but I don't know how to use the microphone clearly. And so it was a peculiar list of women in many ways. It was a very white list, predictably. It was a quite middle-aged list, again, quite predictably. I think the majority were privately educated, which is a cause of concern to many people, and I think that's why we are changing it this year and doing a separate list called Game Changers, which I really very firmly believe will include many of the women that Kira referred to earlier, and they have every right to be there. It's absolutely vital that those women are acknowledged. But I think that the power list was right. I mean, the Queen probably does wield considerable power and influence. Theresa May, I think, fought shy of describing herself as powerful, which is extraordinary. But maybe some of us in this room, and maybe people like me, need to ask ourselves a few questions about that. The word ambition is always used to insult women. An ambitious woman is one of the most evil things you can ever be, particularly in the Daily Mail. I think that's the adjective they like to throw out whenever they really want you to dislike somebody. And I just think it's so absurd. I mean, the idea that David Cameron will ever have been described as the ambitious David Cameron is quite preposterous. Or the ambitious Gordon Brown. Maybe Gordon Brown wanted to be Prime Minister. Isn't that terrible? No, because he's every right to be ambitious for a job like that, and so is every woman in the room and every one of our daughters. And I do feel incredibly passionate about this. And to go back to confidence or lack of it, when you interview women, and I interview a lot of women, I think it was Shirley who mentioned the lack of confidence and few women who speak up in public. It is astonishing the self-deprecation that women come into the room with. They are loaded with it. I mean, I interviewed E.L. James just before 50 Shades of Grey was published. Now, you may or may not have read 50 Shades of Grey, you may or may not have enjoyed it, whatever. That woman knew she was on the cusp of a publishing phenomenon, knew she was going to make shed loads of money, and the first thing she said to me, even before she said hello, was, "I'm not a very good writer, I'm sorry you had to read that book." And this wasn't on the radio, but I did say, I've read the book, and I think you might be onto something. I mean, I could be wrong. And that's just a very small indication of the way some hugely successful women see themselves and choose to see themselves, or feel they have to get the self-deprecation in first, so then maybe people will like me and they won't think I'm a ruthless old cow.
Yeah, they won't like you anyway, is what I've found.
What? I mean, if you're successful?
Well, what I mean is
that's a bit depressing.
I speak from personal experience. What I mean is they won't like you more for being self-deprecating. It's an illusion that you are liked more for being self-deprecating. But we are certainly, you're quite right, we are taught to believe that more smiling, more, sort of turning yourself into the shadows slightly, that this will make you more popular. Whereas if you actually have got power and you do that too, you just look shifty.
Actually, I may have to rail back on my own self-deprecation, actually, now, if what you say is true. I'm going to forget that completely.
We like you.
I also, domestic violence has been mentioned as well, and I was at the Women's Aid conference on Wednesday of this week, and it was an unusual, I didn't know it was unusual, but it was a connection for the first time between groups of people helping victims of child abuse and groups of people trying to deal with domestic violence. And of course, they don't normally get together, which seemed to me to be absurd. But of course, it's true that a lot of child abuse occurs in homes where there is also an enormous and depressing amount of domestic violence. And the room, of course, it was a bit smaller than this, but it was 99% female. So the issue of domestic violence and child abuse have almost been ghettoized as being a woman's problem.
when the problem is actually with men. But we don't see it that way, and all too often they're not involved in these really important conversations about why some men behave in this way. Often, of course, it's because it's the way their father behaved and the way they saw their mother being treated. But I think as well that we just have to move these conversations about women and men and relationships out of any kind of ghetto and into the mainstream, and that is what Woman's Hour tries to do. I mean, we are not perfect. And we still have a cooker in the studio, which is something that I when I was first shown it in 2007, I honestly couldn't believe that I was expected to routinely conduct interviews about cooking.
I thought you were just to rustle up an omelette for your lunch.
No, just rustle up breakfast for John Humphreys. Well, I mean, Jenny and I do, you know, when we have a bit of time, we will do the breakfast. No, I mean, it's because we still feature cooking on the programme quite regularly. I mean, and the thing is, it's popular, and I like cooking as much as the next man or woman. So a bit is how much I like cooking, and because I just have to do it. It's just a fact of life. And we've wrestled with dumping cooking from the programme, but Woman's Hour, as I was also told at the very start, is not a feminist programme. It is a programme that views the world from the woman's perspective. Mm-hmm. And of course, famously, to add a historical note and a slightly Anaraki note in terms of radio, it was first presented by a man for 6 months. This was in 1946 when the programme first started, and the BBC simply didn't believe that women at home would want to listen to another woman's voice.
Yeah, but you know, I know we're gasping and laughing at that, but you know, that isn't so surprising. I mean, we can't pretend that if we live in a world that is structured around male power, and if we live in a world that implies that to rail against that will make you badly behaved, and that has been the history, then most well-behaved women are brought up to respect men as the elder and more powerful voice. That is the kind of the thing that you are encouraged to believe. That's what Shakespeare's full of, etc., etc. And you know, even in Shakespeare, you can see when the badly behaved woman, you know, Catherine in Taming of the Shrew, or even Portia talking to Brutus, or you know, in Merchant of Venice, Portia talking, you know, going out to defend the case of her husband. You can see that the issue of a well-behaved woman is the final issue of being loved and accepted. So it's not surprising to me that women could still be the people who put other women down. I mean, that happens in lots of cultures and in lots of ways.
But then we've really all got to sort ourselves out in that respect. And I've said before that I sometimes feel I suffer from a kind of feminist Tourette's, that I will be watching the television with my daughters and I will see a woman come on, and my God, before I can even, it's out of my mouth, I've said, "Oh, what's she wearing?" And this is me saying this, and this is outrageous, and I hate myself for it. And we've got to stop. We've all simply got to stop. And you referenced Shakespeare, talking about women and women's voices. I mean, I've got to just bring the conversation right down to local radio, if I can, which is a long way away culturally from Shakespeare. But at the moment, I'm judging the radio awards for this year. They used to be called the Sony Awards, and now they're called the Radio Academy Awards. And I'm ploughing my way through 47 largely local radio breakfast shows and trying to judge the best, which is the best. It's been really, really depressing that so many of them have fallen into the trap of having jocular Johnny at the mic, assisted by giggly Julie, doing the travel and simply facilitating his personality. And you hear this time and time again, and it drives me insane. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why women allow themselves to be put into these roles. And the audiences for these programs are big. So people obviously like it, which, again, is just a deeply troubling concept. It really is.
Well, I a lot of us like the things that comfort us because we recognise them and we know them. And it is always a bit scary to suddenly think, well, actually, there's a different way of doing things. You know, people are scared to join the gym to get fit. People are scared to try out new things and go on foreign holidays. There's lots of versions of changing things where people initially go, I don't want to do that. But bit by bit, if you can see that something is going to bring you something better, then they do. And I suppose it's that how do you describe a better world before you've had it? I mean, one of the things I think is interesting about your work, Sarah, is that you're travelling to parts of the globe, and Shirley, where people really have never seen even an emancipated world, and yet they have in their heads that it must be better, or it can't be worse. I don't know which it is. It must be better? Is that what they instinctively feel?
I've just come back from a trip to northern Ghana where I went right up to the top and went to village schools that had no running water and most of them had no electricity. One of them had just got their first electric line in and were due to get computers, so it'd be interesting to go back and see that change. But I went to a classroom that was under the trees and with the school being built next door, and the teacher introduced me and said, this is Sarah, she comes from Britain. Nothing. No one had heard of Britain. Then they said, tried London. Nothing. No one had heard of these places at all. So that perspective. But in that same visit, I also visited the local village chief, and he lined everything up. So of course he inevitably had all the men sitting at his feet and all the women on a little mat further away. And then he had his bench for the VIP visitors. We were all seated along there, which was all women and one man, at which point he turned around and commented that he was right behind girls' education and he could see that all the VIPs were women. So you think, here's a part of the world where the children have never heard of Britain or London, and yet there's a village chief who's engaged in talking to people, not quite changing who his power base is around his feet, but acknowledging that the subject and the things that are changing locally is girls going into school. I thought it was interesting to see the two alongside each other.
Fantastic. Right, we've got time for about 3 or 4 questions. There's a woman there with her hand up, there's a woman there with her hand up, there's a woman there with her hand up, and there's a young woman there with her hand up, and those are the 4. Right. So if we just, yes, thank you. If we've got 2 microphones, could you get one to this lady while we're at it? Actually, sorry, you go up the back, because that'll save the running. Who was the lady with the back? Yeah, grey cardigan. Yes, thank you.
Mindful of your comment then about we like to see things as a status quo, how is it that we've allowed men to co-opt this position of being celebrity and expert chefs? Given that women do so much cooking, why is the television and every newspaper that features cooking allow men to own this task, which basically women do?
Who'd like to answer the cooking question? Yes?
I think it's quite interesting because I think it goes back to childhood. Because talking about these toys, sort of boys' toys and girls' toys, cooking is sort of fairly unisex. But if you go and buy a sort of a cooking set for my daughter, there's a boy with a chef's hat and a girl wearing a pinny. So even from that age, it's all the boys are doing the powerful stuff and the girls are just doing the cooking. So I think, unfortunately, it's a societal problem, and it stems right from the start. And finding ways to overcome that, I think, is a challenge.
I think anybody else want to answer that question?
Well, we have got Mary Berry, who's
a
a living saint. No, I mean, Mary happens to be a lovely, lovely woman, and she's also in her 70s and is now probably one of the most visible older women, certainly on television, and more power to her. She's also really, really good at what she does.
I mean, we have got Delia Smith, we have got Nigella Lawson, we have got
Jack Monroe.
Jack Monroe, yes. Yeah. We have got some. But I mean, a point I'd like to make is that it's a bit like maestros and directors of films and so on. There is a sort of idea that the central divine creative genius, when cooking isn't just cooking, it's creating. That sort of gesture seems to be associated with men and not with women. Yes. And I think this is a lot to do with confidence and stereotyping as well. Yes, young woman at the back with the grey cardigan on. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been so inspiring. I'm just here. My name's Persia, and I'm here with my best friend and business partner, Joey. And we run an alternative lifestyle brand called Addictive Daughter. And our whole thing is that we help young women cure their quarter-life crisis. And obviously, we help young women, so we knew it was about women. But listening to you all today, we've just kind of realised what a feminist issue this is, the quarter-life crisis, because the men that we talk to, without a doubt, they identify with having this quarter-life crisis, which is, I don't know how much you know about it, but it's...
Could you explain quarter-life crisis? do you mean 25 years old?
Yeah, it's the thing in the 20s, all of us just kind of depressed, not happy, a lot of addictive behaviours, drinking too much, relationships in crisis, and, no money and struggling with careers. And the men that we talk to really identify with the finances and career side and feel like I'm ashamed that I'm not more successful. And women definitely identify with that too, but the primary thing that we experienced a few years ago when we went through our own quarter-life crisis, and that women come to and talk to us about, is actually it's the relationships thing, and it's a marriage thing, and it's a baby thing. It's my 30th birthday is on the horizon, and I don't have a boyfriend, and I'm scared I'm going to be alone. And men never talk about that. They just talk about the issue about, not feeling as successful. So I don't know if you could possibly shed any light on why you think that might be.
Shirley?
It's a very good question,
It's
damn
a
it.
very good question.
And I was actually pondering the answer. I don't know if anybody here has read a book called In a Different Voice, which is by a rather famous woman writer. I can't remember her name at the moment, but it's a very important book. And what she says is that if you look at girls in for example, the schoolroom or the university, they're almost always talking to one another. In other words, the relationship with other people is the basis of what they tend to say. Men more often present themselves as individuals, sometimes in competition with other men. So in a way, women from the very beginning are relationship people. Now, I think can only change that by making men aware of the importance of relationships, and I think at the moment they're still in denial. Of course it's important to them, but they like to pretend that essentially they can make their own lives, and it isn't something to do with the relationships, it's something to do with themselves.
I think it's interesting you still have that comparison between spinster and bachelor. And apparently, apparently spinster was actually once quite a positive word for a woman who spins things, right? So now it's a really negative word. Being a bachelor is really, cool. Still kind of cocktails and having fun. And I think women are still sort of defined by their relationships a lot of the time. They're defined like that in the media, and they're only seen as successful if they have a kind of happy domestic realm, in a way that it doesn't matter. A man can be single till he's 40 and no one's going to judge him for that. They're only going to judge him on his career. But I think women have internalised the fact that they will be judged on their success in the domestic sphere and the relationship sphere. And I think we have to get beyond that.
But there is the biological clock.
Yeah.
And we can't get around that, unfortunately. Well, technology maybe,
we will.
given time. But at the moment, it's still ticking. And I think that is a pressure for women, because they know that they are sort of fertilised for a certain period and beyond that. So I think that is a very strong pressure.
Let me add one phrase to that. I completely agree with that. But I think it's worth remembering that when Mrs. Thatcher first became leader of the Conservative Party, you may have forgotten by now, but there was a lot of speculation in the newspapers about whether a woman could manage being Prime Minister and the change of life at the same time. Because both were around about 45 to 50.
Well, because you go mad when you had the menopause.
I remember one or two Tory MPs saying to me, she'll simply get hot flushes. How can you deal with a war if you've got a hot flush? And we don't hear that anymore, thank God.
Well, you do when you want Putin. He clearly has been having some hot flushes, hasn't he?
You embarrass Mr. Putin, I imagine.
Could you take the question from this lady here? Thank you. And then the final microphone to this lady here.
Just 2 points. Back in the 70s, I co-founded the first ever women's motor mechanics workshop, training women to City and Guild standard. The other day, to my horror, I discovered that less than 1% of mechanics in Britain are women. So I thought 35 years later, oops. But my question is, I was also part of the, anti-page 3 stuff back in the sort of early days. And I'm wondering, is it really still relevant? I mean, I can see boys standing at bus stops on their mobile phones accessing hardcore porn, via a mobile phone, via their computers. And if you look at the average MTV music video, it's more soft porn than anything that was around in kind of, my early day. So I'm wondering, how relevant is page 3 in today's technological world, where hardcore porn seems to be the norm?
Okay, thank you. Kira?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good question, and I think there will be and have been campaigns against pornography as well. So I don't think it's a case of only tackling that one image. I think where it's relevant is that The Sun is by far the biggest selling newspaper on the market. And that is the biggest image of a woman in the biggest selling newspaper. So it's the biggest image of a woman every day is a teenager or 20-something topless in her pants. And I think that has to be relevant, it has to be influential. And in terms of kind of very specific incidents that have been related to Page 3, I know on everyday sexism and in relation to the Page 3 campaign, there have been a lot of people talking about situations where boys do take, they pick up the son off the bus or they take it into school, they compare the girls in their class to the girls on Page 3. And so it's absolutely only a very, very small part of a spectrum of sort of sexualisation and objectification, but it is probably the most visible part.
Jane?
Yeah, all I'd say is that if you want to make an old Etonian who happens to be Prime Minister really squirm, sit on quite a small sofa with him and ask him what he thinks about Page 3. Because it's, on this was in, I think it was last October, possibly later than that, but it was the same week that the government had relaunched its anti-internet porn, his internet porn crusade. And it is trying, in fairness, I think the government are trying very hard to try to do something about the porn on the internet and about children's access to it. And on Women's Hour, we have fairly relentlessly linked this crusade with the government's refusal to add its voice to the anti-Page 3 campaign. And the truth is, I honestly don't believe that David Cameron does see a link. He thinks they're two very different sorts of things. I believe passionately that it's what Page 3 signifies. As Kira says, it's the fact that it's lying around in cafe tables, it's on buses, it's on tube trains now, discarded all over London. Telling young people what exactly? And in fact, earlier in the year, I'd interviewed David Cameron on exactly the same subject, and the Page 3 girl that day was called Sam. And I said, Page 3 today is Sam, who's 23, and the whole thing, it is just preposterous. I think Claire Short was, I have to be reminded about when she tried to take this on, but it must have been in the 1980s. The woman was utterly vilified. At least now, this current campaign is getting widespread support from all sorts of different parts of society. But I have to say, although the signatures I know are going up every day, and it's 151,000 now, probably 155,000, 7 million people see The Sun every day, and clearly the majority don't care.
Shirley?
Well, a very short story, because we always have to look both ways, both at men and women. I lived in a flat next door to a man who was, I suppose, a bachelor, whatever he was something like that. and one night, about midnight, I heard hammering at my door, and I opened the door, and I saw a woman crawling in a torn nightdress covered with blood. And I just said, you better come in here. And I pulled her into my flat and shut the door. She turned out she'd been completely beaten to a frazzle by her boyfriend, a bit like the story in South Africa at the moment. After about 20 minutes, I said, do you want me to ring the police? She said no. I said, do you want me to get you to a safe haven? She said no. And finally, she said, I'm going back. And I said, you must be mad. Don't go back. And she said, I have to go back. And she crawled back into the room next door, and again I heard the sounds of screams. Now there are quite a lot of women like that who actually are drawn to the idea of being run around, conquered, beaten up, etc. And we have to find out why, because there is a lot of oppressed women who choose to be oppressed, and we really need to discover the reason for that. I suspect it's really quite common.
Okay, I think, okay, hold on.
Well, you make your own mind up, but that's my view. And I've been an MP for many, many years, and the number of women who've come to see me who've been beaten up by their husbands or partners and I refuse absolutely to recognise that is quite considerable.
Well, hold on.
Hang on.
Hold on. Can I, no, it's fine. Not to try to minimise what you want to respond to, but we've got other sessions talking about these things, and we can't pick up the whole idea of domestic violence in this session. But what I would like to say is that it is undeniable we had Erin Pitsey here last year, along with Camilla Babangela, etc., talking about something that becomes endemic into a family structure through imagery and through repetition, which can then make people almost, as a knee-jerk reaction, feel that they belong inside a system which is terrorizing them. I mean, that is true. How they escape from it and how one draws them away from it, we don't have the resources in society set up to do that properly, and it is so ad hoc and terribly fragile, and even more so with the cuts. But, I mean, just to finish off the page 3, and of course, I think the point is that you're making a link as well, that I can only speak as a woman when I go and talk to men, and I'm often in an authority situation, and when page 3 is lying on the table as I talk, about whatever it is that I'm trying to achieve that day, it's a very discomforting situation, because you feel that finally what one's saying is, well, whatever you think you are, basically you're someone with tits. Yes. And somebody whose tits are available to us. And that's a very strange situation. So the issue of sort of respect is something, simple respect, that I think we might have to tackle. There's one more question here. Thank you. This microphone.
Can I just say thank you to everyone? It's been a marvellous, inspiring, insightful and a range, Jude, of opinions and experience. But I want to pick up, Maggie, on nurseries, because back in the 80s I did a study in reception of the 5 different ways in which the boys, not violently, exclude the girls from the construction area. And people used to say the girls do not want to ride on the bikes and the trikes. Okay, let's try a girls' only day. And what happened? They did. They just couldn't get near them. And if they got onto them, the boys would push them off. Now, surely it wasn't because they're aggressive, horrible boys. They were entitled. And I think when you say about fathers, I happen to know Betty Boothroyd's father played a large part in bringing her up. And I happen to know a very famous scientist whose father also played a very large part in bringing her up. And I think violence in the playground, education in the nursery, don't write a new secondary curriculum, it's too late. In the nursery, a little lad comes up to me and he says, he's in the dressing up box, the Wendy house, I believe it was called when I arrived in this country. He trots up to me and he's got a skirt, a long dress on, and he says, men's don't wear skirts, do they? Which was a very interesting question, and that's where it starts, and that's where we need to be concentrating and looking, because Judy is respect. And the role models and respect, I need a third R, but that's where I'm coming from. We build that society in which people will be equal and men will play an equal part with the women.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, well, I think that's a positive note to end on. You've got your next sessions to go to, but can I just thank this great range of speakers for giving us such a heartening morning.